I always felt very sorry for Brian. He was two things. He was not very nice, and he upset people very easily. He wasn't very pleasant, I mean.
There have been rumors about Brian Jones, the Rolling Stones founder, and his relationship with Mick Jagger, from how he was removed from the band he formed to his struggles with women, authorities, and substances. Jagger has decided to break the silence. Join us as we unveil every detail. Towards the end of the 1960s, Brian Jones was a mess. The founding guitarist of the Rolling Stones was one of the most famous rock stars in the world, but the pressures of stardom were beginning to lead him down a darker path. Extreme substance use turned Jones into an entirely different being. At the same time, the constant pressures he faced from the authorities as a result of his lifestyle and habits caused him to become increasingly isolated. In fact, at some point, some of his close associates mentioned that it was certainly no fun being around Brian Jones. Brian Jones was kicked out of the iconic Rolling Stones, the band he started in 1969. Mick Jagger's revelation about how he and the others had treated Jones is surprising. Jagger's response wasn't straightforward, but his revelation would give a glimpse to some of the things Jones had to bear before his tragic passing. Brian Jones was the multi-talented, creative inspiration for the Rolling Stones band. During that time, most people even believed that if there had been no Brian Jones, there would have been no Rolling Stones. Louis Brian Hopkins Jones was born on the 28th of February, 1942 in Cheltenham, Gloucestershire, England. An attack at the age of 4 left Jones with asthma. As a young child, he hated the fact that he had to stick to normal school uniforms and school routine, and often showed open hostility toward his teachers. Jones attended local schools, including Dean Close School from September 1949 to July 1953, and Cheltenham Grammar School for Boys in September 1953. As a student, he enjoyed badminton and diving. He finally obtained 7 Olivelle passes in 1957. His hostility to the school authorities resulted in his suspension from school on 2 occasions. Well, thankfully, there was something else in his life that made him much happier and a different path, which he had a longing for: music. From that young age, Jones was a music lover, and it wasn't too long when he started playing gigs in clubs around the city. However, that was the good part. The bad part was that he was also doing something else, getting into trouble with women as a teenager. After some time, Jones made a move to London to become involved in the jazz and blues music wave at that time, but after a few failed attempts with some London bands by May 1962, he made one of the biggest decisions in his life, which later became the start of something iconic. However, little did he know that it would contribute to his frustration later on. Jones decided to place an advertisement to start his own band. It was on the second May edition of Jazz News, a Soho club information sheet where he invited musicians to audition for a new R&B group at the Bricklayers Arms pub. Through the advert, he met Ian Stewart, and then Mick Jagger and Keith Richards also signed on. Jones was soon busy on the phone trying to secure a venue for his newly formed band. When the club owner asked him what the name of the band was at that time, the Best of Muddy Waters album was lying on the floor, and a track named Rolling Stone. Immediately, while looking around to think of a name, his eyes fell on the album, and he suddenly said the name of the band was the Rolling Stones. By the 12th of July, 1962, the new band consisting of Jones, Jagger, Richards, Stewart, bass player Dick Taylor, and drummer Tony Chapman played their first gig at the Marquee Club. As time went by, the Rolling Stones added Bill Wyman on bass because he had a spare guitar amplifier and always had some substances, as well as a bass guitar that he had built himself. They also persuaded jazz-influenced Charlie Watts to join them. During that time, Watts was considered to be one of the best drummers in London. Brian Jones at this time did something that got the other bandmates angry. Jones mentioned that he was the boss and leader of the band. At this point, he felt that his services as a gig finder were worth a little more money than the other guys. While acting as the band's business manager, Jones received £5 more than the other members, which did not sit well with the rest of the band, especially Richards and Jagger. Mick Jagger looked back on some of the early tension between him, his bandmates, and the band's founder, Brian Jones. Jagger mentioned that he and the other bandmates were not satisfied with some of the things Jones did, especially the tendency to call the Rolling Stones his band. Although it was indeed Brian Jones who founded the band and signed up Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Bill Wyman, and Charlie Watts, and served as the band's leader in its formative years. He went on to mention that the Rolling Stones only got to experience outstanding success after going from playing blues covers to writing original songs. According to Jagger, these original songs were a result of Richards and his input, since they wrote the bulk of the band's early songs. During an interview, Mick Jagger looked back on how Jones called the Rolling Stones his band, even though he took no part in the songwriting process, and explained further that Jones was very musical and was able to pick up different instruments. Aside from that, he also mentioned that Jones was quite innovative, so a lot of his contributions were perhaps not for melodies and lyrics, but for the things that he played. Jagger, still speaking, talked about how Jones used to tell people that the Rolling Stones was his band, and whenever the other bandmates heard about it, especially himself and Richards, they would be extremely surprised at Jones for making such comments. And sometimes, in response, they would ask him what he meant by "it's his band," that they thought it was our band, not Brian's. Jones, on the other hand, was also not a fan of Jagger's longing to be in charge. He even mentioned that they were surprised to learn that Jones considered himself the leader and was receiving more money. All of a sudden, deep resentment grew in the band, and immediately all of the guys in the band except Jones wanted a real manager who would manage things. It wasn't long after that decision was made, they found one, Andrew Loog Oldham. Somehow, this was bad news for Jones, as the new manager didn't think the band's image could tolerate a member being a father. As such, Oldham made a demand requesting that Jones was not allowed to mention anything about his child or his girlfriend. As such, he was not allowed to be seen with either his girlfriend or their child. We would talk about the controversies surrounding his many kids in the later part of this video. Well, while the fame was gradually coming, Jones wasn't done with his longing for women, but this time, he was going to meet someone who was equally going to give him a taste of his own medicine. In 1965, the Rolling Stones were on tour in Munich, and they ran into Italian-German model and actress Anita Pallenberg backstage, and Jones started a relationship with her. Jones and Pallenberg's relationship had a huge effect on him as an artist. During the period they were together, she encouraged him to become more experimental. Well, soon she became the center of a huge conflict among members of the Rolling Stones. By the break of 1967, Jones, Pallenberg, and Richards were traveling together when all of a sudden, Jones fell ill and had to go to the hospital. Jones's admission at the hospital meant that Pallenberg and Richards would be on their own while touring, and obviously would have to be together most of the time. As time went by and Jones was absent, Pallenberg and Richards were getting really close. By the time Jones eventually recovered and caught up with them in Morocco, he noticed something odd had taken place and could sense the chemistry between his girlfriend and Richards. Well, it wasn't long before his anger took over, and he just couldn't stand the sight of their chemistry. All of a sudden, he struck Pallenberg across the face, and in doing so, he broke his own hand. Afterward, Pallenberg returned to England with Richards, and the two moved in together. The news of them moving in together added to the problems he was facing with the Rolling Stones. That wasn't all. Jones turned to using harmful substances, and as time went by, he started missing rehearsals and wasn't acting like a full band member. It was revealed that most times he would refuse to even play the guitar and instead insisted on playing more exotic instruments.
You know, when I think about it, Brian, when we were slogging away with no recognition, just doing what we're doing, you know, and quite enjoying it, but with no great ambitions or anything.
Additionally, it was mentioned that Jones had two sides to his personality. At times, he was amicable and even kind, but at other times, he was mean and hard to work with. Well, they decided to do something else, which many termed a heartless move. The other members of the band began to phase Brian Jones out as a member of the band. This they started with their recording session. At one time, Jones would have been playing a variety of instruments on numerous tracks, but under the new regime, Jones just had small parts on a few tracks. That wasn't all. They moved on to reducing how much he was able to contribute to the band when it came to performance. This was effective in 1968 when the Rolling Stones began a project called the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus. This project was a concert film and also featured other performers. The other band members dealt with him to the point where their colleagues in the industry thought that his days with the band were numbered. Well, Unfortunately, at this time, it already seemed that Jones also wanted to part ways with the Rolling Stones. The night before they were to film Rock and Roll Circus, Jones called the director and said he didn't want to participate, but he didn't stop there. He went on to say that he hated the Rolling Stones. The director managed to talk some sense into him, and Jones came to the set, but it was going to be a terrible day for everyone. It was revealed that Jones was in such bad shape that he couldn't even play his guitar. At this point, he was deeply into drinking and substance use and wasn't strong enough mentally or physically to take any of it. Jones was one of those people who did everything to excess. Well, due to his latest issues with the authorities, the Rolling Stones became totally tired of his troubles, especially since they were preparing for a tour of the United States and getting very nervous because of Jones's legal issues. It would be almost impossible for him to get a visa to go on the tour. While the team was getting ready for the tour, Jones, on the other hand, was consistently missing rehearsals, and whenever he managed to show up, he wasn't really active. When he got an opportunity to perform, it was so bad that the other band members had to unplug his amp. For most, Jones's last notable contribution to the Stones' canon was his slide guitar work on No Expectations. The Beggar's Banquet track was recorded just as Jones was beginning to fade from the front lines of the Stones. As Mick Jagger revealed, No Expectations was the final time that Jones was alert, creative, and fully involved in a song's creation. According to him, that was the last time he remembers Jones being totally involved in something that was worth doing. It was revealed that he was there with everyone else, but he had just lost interest in everything. Brian Jones's love for music was highly commendable, but his love for women and substances led to several down moments in his life. Let's get into the details of a few struggles and controversies he got himself involved in. While he was enjoying the beauty of playing at clubs and getting small gigs during the early phase of his career, Jones somehow got his girlfriend pregnant. She had to eventually carry the baby to term, and then the young couple made the decision to give the baby up for adoption, which they followed through. Some people would expect that Jones would take a chill pill and be more careful with women and his longing for intimate moments. Well, not Brian Jones. He isn't one to learn his lessons just yet. Just about a year later, Jones found himself in the same situation again, another unwanted pregnancy. This was in the summer of 1959, when his then girlfriend, who was a Cheltenham schoolgirl named Valerie Corbett, became pregnant. Although Jones encouraged her to have it terminated, she refused and decided to carry the child to term, giving birth on 29th of May 1960 and naming the child Barry David. Like the first time, another adoption of the baby took place. The adoptive parents renamed the boy Simon. Jones lived a bohemian lifestyle abroad, feeling good with his guitar on the streets for money and living off the charity of others. Well, it wasn't long. Eventually, he ran short of money and returned to England. By the time he got to England, Jones had a one-night intimate affair with a married woman. This was in November 1959 when he went to the Wooden Bridge Hotel in Guildford to see a band perform. He met a young married woman named Angeline, and the intimate moment they both shared resulted in another pregnancy. Following the incident, Angeline and her husband then decided to raise the baby, Belinda, who was later given birth to on the 4th of August, 1960. Jones never knew about the pregnancy or the birth, as the woman and her husband secretly decided to raise the child as their own. By 1961, Jones already had 3 kids with 3 different women. He had to reflect on a way forward in his life, so he applied for an art scholarship, which he eventually won. But another trouble came up just before he could take hold of the offer. An unnamed acquaintance sent a letter outlining to the college exactly why Jones was not a worthy recipient of the scholarship. The letter even stated that he was an irresponsible drifter, and as such, the offer was withdrawn. Feeling really frustrated about the whole incidents playing out in his life, Jones was back to square one and back to his reckless ways with women. By the 22nd of October of the same year, his girlfriend Pat Andrews gave birth to his 4th known child, Julian Mark Andrews. With an intention to do things right this time, Jones decided to move in with the mother and child. He got a job and even sold his vast collection of records to buy clothes for the baby and flowers for his girlfriend. At this phase of his life, Jones was totally proud of both his child and his girlfriend, but by the time he had formed the Rolling Stones, things had to change. Just after the new manager came in, Jones at this point had to agree to the demands and assured his family that it was temporary and good for his career. During an interview a few years later, his then-girlfriend Andrews stated how their early days turned out and how difficult being in a relationship with him was. She mentioned that in the early days of their relationship, although she and Jones were both working, his interest in the guitar meant he did not have much money to buy food or anything beyond paying the rent. According to her, Jones was initially proud of herself and their child, but when the Rolling Stones acquired a manager and they were pushing for their rise to stardom, Jones was instructed not to be seen with them. She went further to state that at that time he told her that she would have to put up with it for just a few months until the band had some success. However, it didn't happen as Jones said. By the time the Stones did become successful, she noted how Jones drifted away and became more interested in the famous people he met. In fact, it was so bad that she never received a penny from Jones at all. She even went ahead to tag him as someone who just uses people. By the break of October 1964, one of Jones's girlfriends, Dawn Malloy, announced to Jones and the Rolling Stones management that she was pregnant by him. The manager handed £700 to her, and she was made to sign an agreement that the matter was now closed and that she would make no statement about Jones or the child to the public or the press. Well, Malloy eventually gave the child up for adoption. By 1965, he met German singer Nico and began a short relationship with her. However, she became pregnant during their time together, and they decided to have it terminated in London. By May of 1967, the authorities charged Jones with possession of substances, and the case was charged to court. In the middle of the trial, his mental health took a turn for the worse. He had to start seeing a psychiatrist who got so worried that Jones was on the verge of a breakdown. Due to his condition, the judge showed pity on him and only required him to continue treatment under the care of his psychiatrist. All through the period of his issues with the authorities, the members of the Rolling Stones were not happy with Jones at all. In another instance, the authorities once again caught him in possession of substances. As an excuse, he mentioned that they belonged to the previous tenants of the apartment, but the judge wasn't buying it. He started talking about putting Jones behind bars. While in court for his trial for possession, there was both a judge and a jury. The jury wasted no time in proclaiming him guilty, but the judge felt a bit sorry for him and didn't want to see him in prison. Instead, Jones got a light fine and was told to stay out of trouble. On one occasion, tragedy struck. When Jones went on a motorcycle ride and somehow ended up driving straight into a shop window, he was rushed to hospital, and there the authorities took pity on him. They allowed him to check in under an assumed name to avoid bad publicity. He avoided some negative news coverage, but he still had the wrath of the band to face. There's no doubt that Jones was clearly suffering with being in the band, and unfortunately, his personal life was no better. Soon, he was to be thrown out of the band he had formed and eventually met his tragic end. Let's also get into the details. As their US tour date got closer, it became clear that Jones would not be eligible for a permit. This was exactly what the other band members had hoped for. By the 8th of June, 1969, the members of the band told him that he would not be continuing with the Rolling Stones. Sadly, he got thrown out of the band he formed. Well, many speculated that in order to keep his pride, Jones had to make the announcement that he was leaving the band because they couldn't agree on the kind of music they were making. So, it was finally time for Jones to show the world what he could do on his own. Sadly, he didn't have much time to do it, as his demise was slowly coming. Following his departure from Rolling Stones, Brian Jones was now free of the band he hated so much. Then he decided to purchase an estate and started trying to assemble a new band. Unfortunately, on the 3rd of July, while he was spending the evening with his girlfriend Anna Wolin, he thought of having a late-night swim. However, he was informed by a nurse he was in no condition for a safe swim, considering how many substances and drinks he had consumed. Later that night, a housekeeper entered the pool area and saw a shocking scene. Jones was lying at the bottom of the pool, and he wasn't moving. His girlfriend immediately jumped into the pool and dragged him out to safety. By the time the paramedics came, they discovered that Jones was long gone. Then a detective arrived and found multiple empty bottles. Aside from that, he also found containers of pills, so it was clear what the reason for his drowning was. The coroner's report stated it was a drowning, and later passing by misadventure, it was also noted that his liver and heart were greatly enlarged by past substance use and extreme amount of drinks. Following the incident, evidence emerged suggesting that something else may have been the cause apart from the substance use and drinking. A few speculations also came up suggesting that the night of the party was a heavy pollen count day because Jones suffered from asthma. It could be that the pollen in the air had a strong adverse effect on Jones, causing him to drown. In another instance, it was said that one of the last people to see Jones alive was Frank Thorogood, who initially argued over how much money Jones owed him for his work on the house. Years later, Thorogood mentioned to Tom Keelock that he wanted to get something off his chest at the time when he was close to his demise. He told Keelock that he was responsible for Jones's passing. Following Jones's passing, Charlie Watts and Bill Wyman were the only Rolling Stones members to attend his funeral. Richards was nowhere to be found, and Jagger claimed that the contract for the movie he was working on prevented him from attending. Concerning the tragic end of Brian Jones, Mick Jagger revealed that Jones was very jealous, difficult, manipulative, and for a group like the Rolling Stones, acting in such a way means you will eventually get back as much as you gave. Jagger went further to say he thought of how he behaved towards Jones and felt that he behaved in a very childish way back then, but they were very young and in some ways, the bandmates picked on Jones, but unfortunately, Jones was the one who made himself a target for it. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.